One comment. That is all it took. Not a press conference, not a leaked court filing, not a full interview with receipts stacked on a table. Just one stray comment in the middle of social media traffic, and suddenly the image Claressa Shields appeared to be projecting, disciplined, unbothered, tunnel vision focused on training camp, started to wobble in public. That is why people are talking. Because if Claressa Shields had simply kept posting mitt work, road work, and fight week discipline, the conversation probably would have stayed where she wanted it. On the ring, on the grind, on the next opponent. Instead, the story veered. And once it veered, the internet did what it always does when a public figure reacts harder than the original post seemed to deserve. It stopped looking at the comment and started looking at the reaction. That shift matters more than people think. In celebrity controversy, the first spark is rarely the part that catches fire. The fuel is almost always the response. The post that started this round of discussion, at least based on the screenshots and reposts making the rounds online, did not arrive with a giant siren attached. It read more like a generic observation about how women move in a man's comment section when he's publicly linked to someone else. No direct naming. No giant accusation. No elaborate expose. But the moment Claressa Shields answered in a way that sounded personal, territorial, and very sure of what was happening in Papoose's inbox, the frame changed. Now the internet was no longer asking what the commenter meant. The internet was asking why Claressa Shields felt the need to answer that particular comment so loudly. And that is where the optics started getting ugly for Claressa Shields. Publicly, Claressa Shields has been selling a picture of order, training camp, discipline, positivity, focus, calm energy. That image makes sense for a champion. It fits who Claressa Shields has built herself to be. Someone who overpowers doubt, controls the pace, and performs best under pressure. But social media does not grade people on intent. It grades them on consistency. When Claressa Shields looks serene in one post and sounds irritated in the next, viewers do not treat those as separate moments. They jam them together and call it a contradiction. Fair or not, that is how the machine works. The internet loves a mismatch between branding and behavior because it reads that mismatch as a crack, and cracks are where the crowd believes the truth leaks out. That is why the discussion around Claressa Shields did not stay at, she defended her relationship. It quickly escalated into, why is Claressa Shields this locked in on who is commenting, who is liking, who is allegedly inboxing, if Claressa Shields is supposed to be fully immersed in camp? That question may be glib. It may even be unfair. But it is sticky. And once a question becomes sticky online, it does not need to be perfectly reasonable to dominate the conversation. It only needs to sound plausible enough to repeat. People began joking that this looked less like supreme confidence and more like surveillance. They joked that Claressa Shields sounded less like somebody above the noise and more like somebody auditing the noise in real time. Again, that may be exaggerated. But exaggerated narratives are exactly what social media rewards. The second reason this blew up is history. Claressa Shields is not moving through a neutral public landscape on this subject. Every new reaction involving Papoose gets filtered through the older drama with Remy Ma, through months of online argument about timing, separation, loyalty, and public presentation. That history is why an ordinary defensive moment can instantly become a referendum. To understand why the comments hit so hard, you have to understand the backstory the public already carries into every Claressa Shields headline. Remy Ma and Papoose spent years being presented as one of hip-hop's most durable couples. They met in 2004, married over the phone in 2008 while Remy was incarcerated, renewed their vows on television in 2015, and welcomed a daughter together in 2018. That long arc gave their relationship symbolic weight far beyond celebrity gossip. It became a public story about loyalty, endurance, and what many fans called black love. Source: https://www.vibe.com/list/Remy-Ma-Papoose's-relationship-timeline-breakup. Once a relationship has been elevated to symbol status, the breakup is never just a breakup. It becomes a collapse of narrative. By 2023, rumors were already swirling that things between Remy Ma and Papoose were not solid, with speculation around Easy the Block Captain and public denials adding to the noise. By late 2024, The conflict burst into the open when Remy Ma publicly accused Papoose of dating Claressa Shields, and Papoose responded by claiming he had requested a divorce multiple times. Publicly, that was the moment the love story image began to crack beyond repair. Source: https://www.vibe.com/list/Remy-Ma-Papoose's-relationship-timeline-breakup. Once Claressa Shields entered that storyline in the public imagination, Claressa Shields was never going to be judged as just the new girlfriend. A lot of viewers were always going to cast Claressa Shields as the disruptive figure in a relationship they felt emotionally invested in. That does not prove guilt. It proves context. And context is brutal. Because online audiences do not revisit every controversy from zero. They carry old emotional conclusions into new incidents. So when Claressa Shields gets upset about women allegedly contacting Papoose, critics immediately throw an old accusation back at Claressa Shields. The idea that Claressa Shields herself became involved with Papoose before his marriage to Remy Ma was truly closed. Whether those accusations are fully substantiated is exactly what remains contested. But what matters in a public controversy is not only what can be proved. It is also what is already hardened into audience memory. Once that memory exists, every defensive move by Claressa Shields gets read through it. That is why one of the sharpest lines floating through the reaction was the free agent argument. It sounds casual, but buried inside it is a serious challenge to Claressa Shields' preferred timeline. If someone says Papoose was effectively available, critics immediately counter that there is a legal difference between separated, estranged, and divorced. Marriage is not an emotional mood board. It is a legal status. And in public scandals, legal status becomes rhetorical ammunition. Viewers who distrust Claressa Shields seize on that distinction because it lets them argue that Claressa Shields is simplifying a Messier timeline. Viewers who support Claressa Shields argue the opposite, that adults can be emotionally done long before paperwork catches up, and that outsiders often confuse appearances with reality. Both sides believe the timeline favors them. That is why the argument refuses to die. Public reporting amplified the tension instead of settling it. Vibe's retrospective on Remy Ma and Papoose describes the relationship milestones and notes that, by 2024, the private conflict had become a public spectacle, with both sides accusing the other of infidelity and Shields entering the controversy directly. Source: https://www.vibe.com/list/Remy-Ma-Papoose's-relationship-timeline-breakup. Hot New Hip Hop's later timeline traces how Papoose and Claressa Shields moved from rumor to full public couple mode, highlighting December 2024 as the point where social media screenshots detonated the story, and noting increasingly visible public appearances in 2025, including Papoose walking Claressa Shields to the ring and the two speaking about their relationship in interviews. Source: https://www.hotnewhiphop.com/94452-Papoose-Claressa-Shields-relationship-timeline. In other words, the available public reporting confirms the visibility of the relationship and the long-running dispute around its timing, even if it does not settle every claim the audience keeps relitigating. And Claressa Shields herself helped solidify the seriousness of the relationship in public. In the 2025 Breakfast Club interview summarized by Hot New Hip Hop, Claressa Shields described Papoose as truthful from the beginning and framed herself as secure in the relationship. Source: https://www.hotnewhiphop.com/94452-Papoose-Claressa-Shields-relationship-timeline. That statement is important because it explains why the newer screenshots and defensive comments drew such intense scrutiny. If Claressa Shields has already publicly framed the relationship as stable, honest, and secure, then any moment of visible agitation gets treated as contradictory evidence. Fair? Maybe not. Predictable? Absolutely. The internet loves nothing more than a before and after emotional comparison. It will grab your strongest public statement and hold your worst public reaction right next to it like an exhibit board. That is also why the training camp angle caught on so fast. Under normal circumstances, Claressa Shields being in camp should function like an immunity shield against nonsense. Fans are supposed to see hard work and assume tunnel vision. Instead, the camp imagery became part of the joke. People started asking how Claressa Shields could be in a championship mindset while apparently finding the time and emotional energy to track every whisper around Papoose. That may say more about the cruelty of online spectators than it says about Claressa Shields, but it still creates narrative damage. The champion image relies on control. The minute Claressa Shields looks pulled into comment warfare, people feel invited to question whether Claressa Shields is actually in control at all. And to be clear, there is a real difference between confidence and overcorrection. A secure person can clap back. That is true. But overcorrection has a very specific smell online. It is what happens when the defense contains more heat than the original accusation. It is what happens when the denial feels like it arrived before the threat was fully visible. Critics looked at Claressa Shields' reaction and decided it had that smell. They saw a woman swatting at a fly with a sledgehammer. Once that interpretation took hold, every additional reply from Claressa Shields risked confirming the exact impression Claressa Shields probably wanted to erase. This is where communication style becomes its own subplot. One reason the comparison with Remy Ma keeps resurfacing is not only romantic history. It is method. Remy Ma, in the public imagination, often appears more surgical. An interview here, a track there, a post dropped with just enough sting to travel on its own. Claressa Shields, by contrast, has looked more willing to confront critics directly and immediately. Those are two different public strategies. The first says, I will place my version into the atmosphere and let it circulate. The second says, I am going to challenge this in real time. Neither strategy is morally superior by default, but the internet often rewards restraint with mystique and punishes responsiveness as defensiveness, even when the responsive person may simply be more transparent by nature. So when people say Remy Ma's quiet energy is outperforming Claressa Shields' directness, what they really mean is this. Silence leaves room for projection, while replies create evidence. Every time Claressa Shields answers, there is a new screenshot, a new quote, a new phrase to debate, a new chance for critics to freeze-frame emotion and repackage it as a headline. The digital economy is built to turn reaction into product. That puts Claressa Shields at a disadvantage the second Claressa Shields chooses to fight on that terrain. In the ring, pressure is Claressa Shields' native language. In a comment section, pressure behaves differently. It multiplies. It fragments. It invites strangers to score your tone as if tone were a public trial. There is another layer people keep circling back to, and it is the issue of possession versus partnership. When someone publicly says women are inboxing my man, it is supposed to sound protective, maybe even playful. But online, that phrasing often backfires because the audience hears anxiety hiding inside ownership language. It can make a relationship sound less secure, not more. That is part of why so many people did a double take at Claressa Shields' wording. Not because public figures never defend their partners, but because people sensed an attempt to shut down a rumor that had not even fully formed. And once the audience thinks you are trying to control the narrative too early, they decide the uncontrolled version must be the real one. Then came the escalation problem. According to the screenshots being circulated and discussed across blogs and fan pages, some of the responses attributed to Claressa Shields sounded hotter, sharper, and more personal than the initial setup warranted. That is where the conversation moved from "this is messy" to "why does this feel like it struck a nerve?" A nerve is everything online. The crowd is always hunting for it. The moment they think they found one, they stop engaging with the stated issue and start poking the emotional bruise. That is what makes these cycles so hard to escape. Once people believe Claressa Shields was triggered, the content of future explanations matters less than the fact that Claressa Shields explained it all. Still, there is a counterargument worth taking seriously. Claressa Shields is not a fictional character designed for social media elegance. Claressa Shields is a real person dealing with relentless public commentary about her relationship, her credibility, and her private decisions. Anyone dealing with that level of attention could snap at random. The internet often demands saint-like composure from women while rewarding the same audience for needling them until they crack. Seen from that angle, Claressa Shields' response is not proof of insecurity. It is proof of exhaustion. It is proof that non-stop speculation can turn even a disciplined person into someone who wants to swat the room silent for 5 minutes. That is why this story remains more complicated than either fan camp wants to admit. Supporters of Claressa Shields see a successful, outspoken woman being baited by people who will never give Claressa Shields the benefit of the doubt because they already chose their villain. Critics see Claressa Shields as someone who stepped into a messy timeline and now gets rattled whenever the original overlap allegations return. Both readings contain pieces of truth about how public audiences behave. But only one detail is undeniable. Claressa Shields keeps getting drawn back into a narrative where every reaction is interpreted as evidence. That is a dangerous loop for any public figure, because it means the person is no longer merely responding to the story. The person becomes the engine keeping the story alive. And the stakes are bigger than hurt feelings in a comment thread. Claressa Shields is not just navigating romance gossip. Claressa Shields is managing an elite sports brand, a crossover media profile, and the expectation that a champion should look mentally unshakable. That expectation may be unfair, but it exists. When Claressa Shields is discussed more for relationship turbulence than for boxing excellence, the brand equation shifts. The audience begins reading discipline posts as image management rather than evidence of discipline. They begin reading relationship photos as strategic messaging. They begin reading every caption as either compensation or confession. Once that happens, even ordinary content starts carrying controversy residue. Hot New Hip Hop also noted that Claressa Shields and Papoose leaned into public visibility in 2025, from ring walk moments to interviews to future family talk. Source: https://www.hotnewhiphop.com/9454452-Papoose-Claressa-Shields-relationship-timeline. That visibility can strengthen a couple's narrative when the public likes the story. But when the public is divided, visibility also raises the volume on every contradiction people think they see. If Claressa Shields and Papoose present themselves as solid, the critics do not disappear. They simply sharpen the audit. They watch for mood shifts. They watch for timeline slippage. They watch for possessive language. They watch for emotional leakage. And the moment Claressa Shields gives them any material, however small, they stretch it into a referendum on the entire relationship. That is exactly what happened here. A small social media exchange did not stay small because it plugged into at least 5 unresolved public questions at once. Was the original relationship timeline clean? Is Papoose fully free, emotionally and legally? Does Claressa Shields genuinely feel secure, or does Claressa Shields merely insist on security in public? Is Remy Ma's distance making Claressa Shields look more reactive by comparison? And can Claressa Shields maintain the image of championship composure while continuing to defend the relationship in raw real-time bursts? None of those questions were answered by one comment. But that one comment reactivated all of them at once. That is why the phrase, "the reaction became the real story," fits so perfectly here. The original post was never powerful enough to carry this level of conversation on its own. The power came from what the response seemed to reveal. Once people believed they had caught Claressa Shields stepping out of the poised, polished version of herself, they treated the moment like a slip of the mask. Whether that interpretation is right or wrong almost becomes secondary. On the internet, perception does not need final proof to move. It only needs momentum. And by the time people start debating whether the reading is fair, the reading has already won a full news cycle. Now add the family planning comments that entered the public conversation in 2025 when Claressa Shields discussed wanting a baby and mapping out the future with Papoose. Hot New Hip Hop reported that those plans drew backlash precisely because some critics were still focused on the fact that Papoose remained legally married to Remy Ma at that point, even if separated. Source: https://www.hotnewhiphop.com/9454452-Claressa-Shields-relationship-timeline. So when Claressa Shields speaks protectively now, people are not hearing an isolated girlfriend response. They are hearing it against a background of earlier public declarations about commitment, long-term plans, and certainty. The stronger the prior declarations, the more dramatic even a small wobble can feel. The cruelest part is that Claressa Shields may be right about some of this and still lose the public round. There absolutely are people who troll relationships for sport. There absolutely are women who target attached men for attention, validation, or chaos. And there absolutely is a misogynistic habit online of turning any woman's frustration into proof that she is unstable. All of that can be true at the same time. But public persuasion is not simply about what is true. It is about what is legible. And right now, what feels most legible to a lot of viewers is a champion whose irritation briefly became more visible than her confidence. Once that becomes the visual, it is hard to reverse in a single post. So where does that leave Claressa Shields? In a familiar trap. If Claressa Shields keeps answering, critics will say Claressa Shields is obsessed. If Claressa Shields goes quiet now, critics will say Claressa Shields finally realized the timeline questions were too strong to address. If Claressa Shields posts happy relationship content, detractors will call it overcompensation. If Claressa Shields posts only training content, they will say it is a cleanup campaign. That is the problem with entering a story at the point where the public has already chosen its lens. Every move begins to look like confirmation of the lens. Escaping that requires either undeniable clarity or strategic silence sustained long enough to starve the cycle. And maybe that is the real issue at the center of this moment. Not whether a random woman is in somebody's inbox. Not even whether Claressa Shields had the right to defend her relationship. The deeper issue is whether Claressa Shields understands that public control is not won by responding to every irritant. It is won by deciding which battlefield helps you and which battlefield shrinks you. In a championship ring, Claressa Shields is a force. In a screenshot war, Claressa Shields risks becoming just another person trapped in endless interpretation. That is a downgrade, and audiences can feel it instantly. Because at the end of the day, this was supposed to be a season about focus, about work,